Huh? Seems like we're one seat short, doesn't it? In the private room of a restaurant, there was only one vacant seat at the table. Today was my niece's second birthday. I invited everyone for a birthday celebration, my sister-in-law had said. At the table were my in-laws, my sister-in-law and her husband, and the guest of honor, my niece. But there was only one empty seat. We only prepared seats and meals for family members. If you really want to join, outsiders should naturally bring their own lunch. There's no place to sit, though. But you said to come as a couple. Yes, I wanted to make it clear in front of everyone. I don't want to see the face of someone who's destroying our family. George, you'd better divorce her soon. I couldn't hide my shock. I never expected her to outright say, get a divorce. And to use a child's birthday party to involve the whole family like this. My niece, who should have been the focus of today, looked anxiously at the adults. It's supposed to be a celebration. Let's leave. Yeah. We decided to leave quietly without causing further distress to my niece, handing over only the present. Then, my sister-in-law laughed and called out to my husband. Hey, George. Celebrate with us. You're not a kid, Susan can go home alone. Does she think my husband would never defy her? George glanced at his sister and then, without a word, put his arm around my shoulder and we started walking away. But right after this, another person would stand up, leading to a tragic turn of events for my sister-in-law and her husband. I'm Susan Smith, 30 years old. I work as a freelance CG designer. My husband George and I were classmates in vocational school. After graduation, he joined an advertising design company, and I got a job at a company making game CGs. We started dating after graduation, sharing our work worries. To me, George is a colleague in the creative field, a confidant, and a reliable partner. I decided to become a freelancer when we got married. I was anxious about continuing the demanding job at my company while handling household duties. We can manage my income if it's just the two of us, so why not take the plunge and try it? Really? Then I'll give it a shot, and if it feels impossible, I'll look for another job right away. You'll do fine, Susan. You've always been exceptionally talented, ever since vocational school. George's praise for my work gave me the final push. But, the first year was really tough. Managing schedules and dealing with administrative tasks I'd never done before almost drove me to panic, but George always supported me. By the second year, I had figured out my own way of working and my workload steadily increased. I felt blessed to have a supportive husband and a flourishing career. However, not everything in my married life was smooth sailing. The problem lay with my in-laws. I think my mother-in-law and my sister-in-law, who was pregnant at the time, disliked me from the first time I went to greet them. The two of them, greeting me at the front door, clearly weren't welcoming. Really, George, you're marrying her? Can she even have kids? My sister-in-law and mother-in-law would frown whenever they saw me. Maybe it's because I'm 5 feet 0 inches and look especially tiny next to George, who's 5 feet 9 inches, but this felt rude for a first meeting. Mom, that's rude! George said angrily on my behalf, so all I could do was force a smile. But what my sister-in-law, Mary, said was even worse. Is she the root of all evil? Recently, George, you've started speaking up like an adult, all because of her influence, right? So annoying. I was disheartened right away, greeted with such words at the entrance. It was clear that George's lack of confidence stemmed from these two. Despite his excellent work since our student days, George couldn't accept compliments and often belittled himself. When we entered the house, George's father and Mary's husband, Ken, were waiting in the living room. It's good to see you. George is always grateful for your help. I'm truly happy to have such a lovely woman joining our family. George's father welcomed me with a smile, and I finally felt relieved. Nice to meet you, I'm Ken Grubb, George's brother-in-law. We're expecting a baby soon, so I hope we can get along as a family. Ken was so kind that I wondered how he ended up marrying Mary. He seemed a bit like George. Hey, Mom. Aren't you going to serve some tea? Oh my! I got so excited. Please, Susan, have a seat here. In front of George's father, the two women were as sweet as if their earlier attitude had been a lie. George's father, a man of craftsmanship, held a strong presence as the head of the household, and it seemed neither his wife nor Mary could oppose him. George's father ran his own business and, though he was over 60, he was still actively working. It was because of him that I continued to interact with George's family. Otherwise, I would have cut ties with his mother and sister a long time ago. When we started thinking about marriage, George told me about his family. His father was self-employed, and his mother was a stay-at-home mom. At first, they worked together, but his mother couldn't grasp office work, so his father gave up and left her to handle just the household. Mary was good-looking and smart, so Mom has always been attached to her. His mother, lonely at home, probably became dependent on Mary, her firstborn. Mary might have a difficult personality, but she was certainly a pretty woman. I wasn't neglected or abused, but growing up constantly compared made me feel like a bundle of complexes. George said with a sad smile. What about your dad? Dad was mostly away for work. Mary is 5 years older, so I couldn't oppose her, and Mom always sided with her. That's still how it feels at home. It seemed like George's family home wasn't a good place for him. When his father wasn't there, Mary held absolute power in the house, and even now as an adult, George couldn't refuse her demands. It wouldn't be wrong to say he was brainwashed. That's not right. George, you're talented and your work is recognized. You're an adult now, you can say no to things you don't like. Every time I heard about George's past, where he lacked confidence since our student days, I got angry. Every time George belittled himself, I'd say, George, you're strong. I admire you. I don't know if it worked, but his behavior started changing slowly. Despite this, I wanted to keep a distance from his family, but Mary, who wanted to use George, kept contacting us. Our marriage tightened George's purse strings, but I knew Mary was still wheedling pocket money from him. He hadn't completely broken free from her demands yet. The year we married, Mary and her husband had a baby. When Mary was about to give birth, she called George. Hey George? Buy a baby seat and stroller for the baby shower. I'll send you the product images later, okay? Mary nonchalantly requested expensive international brand items from George. Shocked by the cost, I intervened, and we decided to give a joint present and $2,000 in cash for the baby shower. What? I sent you the images. This isn't nearly enough. A good stroller and baby seat can be bought for $2,000. If you want something more expensive, you should pay the difference yourself. What? I asked George. What do you mean by just $2,000 for your only sister's baby shower? Later, Mary called us. Likely thinking George would comply with anything. Sorry, sis. I'm not single anymore. Mary glared at me, not George. Ever since he started dating me, George had become less submissive to Mary. That's why she called me the root of all evil when we greeted each other. Mary's daughter, my niece, was truly adorable. So, we sent cute clothes and stuffed animals. Of course, that didn't satisfy Mary. When our work was on track, we rented a larger apartment. And moved out of the one I had since I was single. After moving, George's mother and Mary visited unexpectedly on a weekday. Maybe since George wasn't complying, they shifted their focus to harassing me? Why a 3-bedroom for just 2 people? Isn't that too luxurious? Susan, you're not being demanding with George, are you? He's too kind. Their words almost made me retort that the real manipulator was Mary. I remained silent. George might want to start his own business, so we wanted separate workspaces. Even so. They nodded to each other, cold glances directed at me. I felt uncomfortable as they scrutinized the house, but I couldn't voice it. Susan, are you cleaning properly? The house feels dusty. George comes home tired from work, so do your household duties properly. Yes, sorry, I do it in between work. You're a designer, right? Your computer screen looked like you were just playing. Can you even make pocket money with that? They couldn't understand my work, seeing it as a hobby for a housewife's pocket money. Well, maybe my computer screen did look like I was playing. Well. I do make a bit of pocket money. Wow. Then treat us next time. Taking care of your husband's family is also a wife's duty. Right, be nice to Mary. I couldn't help but smile bitterly. Why should making pocket money mean I have to treat Mary? Their presence made work impossible and just drained me. Later, I asked George to stop the unannounced visits, but Mary's invitations were persistent, forcing us to host several times a month. Who knew I'd understand George's inability to refuse? Looking back, Mary probably didn't like that we, childless, lived in a large apartment. Susan, we decided to buy a condo. A year after we moved, Mary and her husband ostentatiously bought a condominium larger than ours. It was an expensive property, but Mary, after leaving her daughter with her mother, started working part-time as a cashier at a supermarket. Thankfully, this meant fewer visits to our house, and peace finally returned to our home. It was a little while after our move that George's father came to us for advice. Since getting married, I had developed a good relationship with my father-in-law, who also runs his own business, and we could discuss work matters. George, Susan, I'm sorry to ask, but could you help me out with some money? It was the first time George's father had ever asked us for help. After hearing his detailed situation, we agreed to send a fixed amount of money every month for a limited time. George said he would handle it, but his income alone wasn't enough. So I'll contribute. George, you're the breadwinner of our house, so make sure you support our living well. George looked surprised and then said, okay, slightly embarrassed, rubbing his nose. But, Mr. Smith, please understand, if my job goes away, I won't be able to help. I understand. I'm really sorry. Thank you. Watching my father-in-law apologize repeatedly, I felt happy that I could finally be of use to George's family. About 2 years later, I found out I was pregnant. We were just talking about wanting a child, so when George saw the positive pregnancy test, he cried with joy. Susan, thank you. I'll be a great dad. Really? Even better than you prioritize Mary? No. I'm not going to give Mary any more financial help. That's a promise. After laughing at George holding the pregnancy test high, we hugged and cried together. It was also a declaration from George that he was no longer just a brother who couldn't stand up to his sister. As I entered the safe period of my pregnancy, we were discussing when to tell George's family when we received a call from Mary. Come to our child's birthday party at a restaurant next week, both of you. Ah, she's turning 2 already? We'll definitely be there. George, now expecting his own child, seemed to feel even more affection for his niece. On the day of the party, when we arrived at the designated restaurant and were guided to the private room, we found Mary and her husband, the in-laws, and the niece already seated. Sorry, you're already here. Happy birthday to the little one. Huh? It seems like there's one seat short. There was clearly only one empty seat, and the table was set for one less than the number of people. Yes, Susan, we didn't prepare a seat for you. We can't associate with someone who makes my wife sad. What? What are they talking about? Ken, Mary's husband, continued, looking at me. Why do you think you have the right to tear apart my wife and George? Ever since you married him, it's been hard to contact George. I started to understand Mary's intentions. She must have fed Ken lies about me to create a situation that favored her. Mary smirked triumphantly when our eyes met. We only prepared for family members. If you really want to join, outsiders should bring their own lunch, though there's nowhere to sit. But I was told to come as a couple. Yes, I wanted to make it clear in front of everyone. I don't want to see the face of someone who's destroying our family. George, you should divorce her soon. I couldn't hide my surprise. I thought Mary wanted to separate me and George, but I never expected her to outright say get a divorce. George, I hear you're under Susan's thumb. Working hard but having no freedom with money. Ever since finding out about my pregnancy, George had firmly refused any financial requests from Mary. That must be why she labeled me an intruder. But to use a child's birthday party to involve the whole family like this. George, silent next to me, pulled me closer as if to protect me. The niece, the supposed star of the day, looked on anxiously at the adults. It was supposed to be a celebration. Overwhelmed with anger and sadness due to my pregnancy hormones, I felt tears welling up. Let's go. Yeah. We decided to leave quietly without causing further distress to the niece, handing over only the present. Then, Mary laughingly called out to George. Hey, George. Celebrate with us. Susan can go home alone, you're not a child. Did she really think her brother would never defy her? George glanced at Mary and then, without a word, put his arm around my shoulder and we started walking away. Then, there was the sound of a chair being pushed back. I'm leaving too. George's father announced as he stood up, gently patting his granddaughter's head and saying, sorry. Mary seemed panicked by her father's unexpected move. What's going on, Dad? I explained about Susan before they arrived. She's a curse, you know. George's father sighed heavily in exasperation. If you really believe that, you're foolish. The money Mom has been sending you is actually from Susan's assistants. What? What are you talking about? That can't be true. Today is our granddaughter's birthday party. It's ridiculous for you to leave. George's mother grabbed his father's arm in a panic. Mr. Smith, what do you mean by this? You've been sending Mary money? Ken interrupted, addressing George's father. Yes, despite working part-time 5 days a week and struggling with living expenses since buying the condo. I'd like to understand this better myself. Mary said that to you? Why would she do that? Ken looked perplexed at Mary, then remained silent as if realizing something. George's father, glancing down at his wife gripping his arm, said with a quiet but angry voice. You'll be staying with Mary for a while. We'll discuss the details later. For now, please celebrate your granddaughter's birthday without us. He placed some money on the table and left quickly, leaving us stunned. We followed him out of the restaurant. Outside, George's father apologized to me. I'm sorry for what Mary did. I wanted to see her true intentions, never expecting her to demand a divorce. Dad, Susan, I'm sorry. I should have been stronger. I gently patted George's back. It wasn't his fault at all. We then went to eat together and told George's father about our relationship with Mary and everything that had happened. George, I'm sorry. I failed to notice as a father. I was too caught up in work and neglected parenting. Seeing both George and his father crying, I felt George's heart was finally being healed. When we told him about my pregnancy, he was genuinely overjoyed. Actually, I've been thinking about something, George's father said, sharing some surprising news. He suggested we meet again later to finalize discussions. When we got home, George's phone had a message from Mary. You didn't give me a birthday gift. We couldn't cancel the food, so you need to pay extra for that. Exhausted, I saw George energetically reply, like hell I'm paying. Idiot. It was clear he had finally cut ties. 2 weeks later, George's father called us to visit Mary's family's condo. The niece would be looked after by a neighbor. As soon as we all gathered, George's mother started questioning. So, what's this about Susan's assistants? George's father explained that his business had slowed down, and his physical ability to work had decreased. He had taken loans from financial institutions and was struggling to pay them off, which led him to ask us for help. You insisted on a certain amount for living expenses, but you were sending some of that money to Mary. I trusted you to manage our finances, and I'm disappointed. What? I checked our savings for retirement recently, and discovered you used some of it for Mary's condo down payment. George's mother turned pale. She had been in charge of the household and finances, and George's father had completely trusted her until now. Apparently, there were sufficient savings for retirement, but Mary's insistence on buying a condo led George's mother to secretly use those funds. Now we're broke. I've been asking George and Susan for help, but you've been sending Mary unnecessary monthly support of $1,600. I had no idea it was that bad. How old do you think I am? I can't work forever. George's mother probably started to take the regular deposits into the household account for granted. But those were not blessings from heaven, they were the result of George's father's hard work. Faced with the harsh reality, George's mother began to tremble uncontrollably. I can't live with you anymore. I can't forgive you for favoring Mary over George and raising them differently. The house is ready to be sold, so don't expect to come back. Selling the house? I'm sorry. I didn't mean for this to happen. What am I supposed to do if you're gone? You've always cared about Mary, so rely on her from now on. I'll contact you about the future. George's mother began to apologize, but George's father silently brushed off her clinging hands. Once George's parents' discussion settled, Ken spoke up quietly. Mary, what's this about the money? Mary flinched. You wanted to work, even though you could have stayed a homemaker, right? You told me it was only 2 days a week. Now it was Mary's turn to turn pale. Ken's inquiry prompted George's mother, who had been crying, to respond. What? She works 5 days a week. I've been taking care of our granddaughter during that time. I even said money because Ken's earnings weren't enough. Quiet. Mom, just keep quiet. What are you talking about? You're the one who lied to make me send money. None of this would have happened if you hadn't lied. George's mother, who had always complied with everything, was now lashing out. Shut up. It's your fault Ken is angry now. Take it back. If we get divorced, it's all on you. Shut up, you big liar. As they engaged in a screaming and grappling fight, Ken and George's father pulled them apart. Forcing an agitated Mary to sit down, Ken laid out several photographs on the table. Mary gasped and widened her eyes in shock. I heard Dad's story and started having doubts, so I investigated you these past 2 weeks. I figured you were wasting money, but I never imagined you were cheating too. What? Everyone looked at the photos in unison. They showed Mary clinging to a man. It's not what it looks like. This is a misunderstanding. It turned out that Mary had been spending her part-time income, money from her mother, and allowance from her husband on shopping and her affair. The man was an unemployed high school classmate she had reconnected with a year ago. No wonder she never had enough money. We're getting divorced. I'll take custody of our daughter. I'm moving back to my parents' place, so if you want to see her, you'll have to come. It's a 2-hour flight away. If Mary is not willing, she won't be able to visit often. Ken seems ready to quit his job and return home. No, I won't divorce. We just bought the condo. It was just a moment of weakness. Please, forgive me. We're a family, right? There's no way I can forgive you. You're the one who broke our family. You're a stranger to me now, and it's better if we get divorced quickly. That's what you always said, right? Mary's words at the birthday party came back to haunt her. She started screaming like a child who couldn't get her way, pounding the table and crying. What's wrong with everyone? Why won't anyone listen to me? Why won't things go my way? Why won't anyone do what I say? The sight of her tantrum was unsettling, like watching a small child in distress. The discussion was over. George's father and we stood up to leave, exchanging glances. George's mother and Mary hesitantly looked up at us. I had one last thing to say. I'm pregnant. Since your father is also getting divorced, we will stop the $6,000 assistance we've been giving next month. That's fine. I've almost sorted everything out. What? Pregnant? $6,000? Mary, who had been crying, suddenly stood up in shock. Mary may think little of Susan, but she's a CG designer earning $10,000 a month. What? Why are you the only one who gets to be happy? I won't forgive you. If you hadn't been here, none of this would have happened. You owe me compensation. Mary charged at me with a ferocious look. But George stepped in front of me and forcefully pushed her away. She crashed into the wall and fell to the floor. Don't you dare touch my family. I'll never be under your control again. Stay away from us. George's words felt like the ultimate retaliation against Mary. As we opened the door to leave, the apartment fell silent, marking our complete escape from Mary's influence. Later, George's parents began living separately with the possibility of divorce. They planned to sell the family home, and George's father finished paying off his loans. He's now living at his office. He says his life has become easier since the separation. George's mother rented an old apartment, receiving $500 for rent and living expenses. Recently, she started working as a cleaning staff at a condominium, probably learning the value of money. Mary was divorced soon after. Despite her mother paying the down payment, Mary couldn't afford the mortgage payments, so the condo was put up for sale. Ken gained custody of their daughter and moved back to his hometown, thanking me for understanding their situation. Mary, with nowhere else to go, moved in with her mother. She's working multiple part-time jobs to pay alimony and child support. It seems their relationship changed with their living arrangement, as George's mother is complaining to relatives about wanting to kick out Mary, who contributes nothing to the household expenses. Working for her own money might finally be giving George's mother some sense of normalcy. My due date for childbirth is approaching soon. Once the baby is born and we've settled down, we're considering buying a house and possibly living together with George's father. Next year, George is planning to start his own business, so we're thinking of working together to balance our jobs, household chores, and childcare.